All right, then before I start talking, so we have some bankers, investment bankers, seaweed project leader in France and going worldwide as well. Panelists, including a few here, as well as several that are in Asia that'll be calling in to share what they're doing with us. And okay, here we go. So this is the subject, how we are supporting with capital and technical assistance blue economy projects in Asia-Pacific region on this pilot year, which we're in right now and will continue next year. And then we'll go to Africa and Latin America as well. This all started when 3 years ago the Asian Development Bank made a very public commitment to putting $5 billion towards the blue economy, which was a new buzzword at the time. And it was remarkable. It sounds like a lot of money actually to us here, but they put out $40 billion a year. So we're glad to get a little bit of that, of catalytic capital though, so it's to engage the private markets with blended finance tools. And remarkably, the Asian Development Bank, which as the name implies, runs from India across to the Philippines with, in the case of the oceans, 29 countries that touch on the ocean. So that's really our universe. And they had never made a loan to seafood, only one to shipping, a few to ports because it's sovereign loans and infrastructure. But all this marine energy, the ecotourism, all the coastal communities and businesses there, waste management, as we know, anything drops in the river goes into the ocean eventually. And the ocean yet is, vital importance to all the countries there. You have the Blue Triangle there. It's the biggest area of coral reefs in the world. The Sundarbans in India and Pakistan are the biggest mangrove growing area in the world, which sequesters up to 5 times as much carbon as forests, as Jessica could tell you from UNEP-FI. And this has really been neglected, which shows SDG 14, our oceans SDG, is the least funded of all the SDGs. And yet the tide has turned, and that's happened also with some reference in that line to UNEP-FI is hosting the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles. And the Turning the Tide report, where we wrote the chapters on shipping and ports, is a good reference for the bankers in the crowd on how to finance these industries. So we were engaged by these three, by ADB, UNEP, and UNDP, to do a mapping of what is the blue economy and how to finance it, what are the financing gaps, what are the risks across these 29 countries. And that led to a bunch of tools that are being used by the bankers at ADB as well as policymakers in the region and the UN that are helpful on a bunch of levels. I'm just mentioning 2 here. We did a matrix of all the standards, metrics that are used by 4 different groups, finance, and they're all different, finance, industry, policy, science. Depends on who you are and what you're looking at, what you need to know about. We counted 16 different sectors and subsectors, running from algae, seaweed, across to the bigger infrastructure ones like ports and shipping and energy. So that matrix is helpful, and then how to match them. The matchmaking process is what we'll talk about here today, of finding the right asset vehicles, investment vehicles, and the right kinds of investors for these various projects, which include a lot of very new ones that we don't have much information on, which are nature-based solutions, which the ocean has much to give. So we developed all these tools basically to be used globally, not just in the Asia-Pacific region. And out of that came the conclusion that the biggest financing gap was for small and medium enterprises, which dominate 90% of the activity in most developing countries, is from SMEs, or MSMEs, if you will. And over 70% of the employment, yet they have the hardest time accessing capital. And local banks, really are not interested unless they have substantial collateral or remarkable history. So we had done this exercise before, so it was a deja vu, and that the European Commission had hired us in when I started Ocean Assets Institute, which, forgot the introduction, is a nonprofit Swiss-based association, but we work globally. But the European Commission wanted to do a similar strategy for the blue economy and financing plan, and we helped put together the Blue Invest program, which runs to this day, has a fund of funds managing, I guess, around 150 million euros right now. They've mobilized 300 or 350 euros a million of capital, new capital towards the blue economy. SMEs in Europe, it was the same conclusion. It's the small companies that are on the front lines of climate change and coastal issues and all of the ocean issues, and yet have the hardest time growing and transitioning to sustainability due to lack of access to capital. So we helped set up that platform, and we said, we can do it in Asia too. And so that's basically the mission that we have with BlueImpact, which was launched earlier this year. Has these 4 components: building the pipeline, developing the investment readiness of the projects, engaging with investors, and closing deals. And we are very much investor-driven and market-driven, and that's my background, is in private capital markets. And my partner Joan, who'll speak in a minute, has a background in risk management and international banking and corporate finance. So we're very much aware of what, or hopefully we are, of what investors need, what their criteria are, and what de-risking they might need with the ADB partnership, as well as the UN partnership on the ground, or in the water, as it were, with technical assistance. So that's the picture of those 4 steps of what BlueImpact is. We have several projects already that we have been working with for several months, and 2 are in the seaweed space, and one is basically a data management platform using blockchain technology to provide across the whole seaweed value chain to improve the transparency, to improve the negotiating power of farmers, to improve management and control, and the ability to scale what is now a very fragmented but very high growth industry, where the farmers are basically permanently in debt to the system, which is at least 50 cents on the dollar goes to traders and middlemen who are performing a function. But that function can be disintermediated to a large extent by technology. So that's what's happening with Seagreen, the middle one there, that's raising $6 million of equity. And Mari Oceans is the production partner that in Indonesia has now had their first harvest, and we're scaling towards 2,000 hectares by 2026. And this is a whole model that's been developing for several years now, and is very powerful in terms of the impacts on the communities, gender, big positive there, as well as giving a break to the fisheries, which, as you may know, are all under stress worldwide. And they're raising another $8.5 million of equity and debt. Both of these groups have had their first closes of investors. Let me know if there's any interest in considering them. And the seafood processing area, which in the Maldives, the project we have there is a well-established company, but nonetheless, not an easy time to raise capital for them. Yet a very successful fishing company in the southern Maldives that has 2 projects. One is, excuse me, a freezing operation. The more they can control the freezing and processing and packaging locally, the more value added they're providing, obviously, and for their communities is a big positive, as well as trying to get off the addiction to diesel fuel. Well, the Maldives really run on diesel fuel, yet they are an atoll country at the highest level of risk. And so powering the plant with solar facilities is part of the project. So that just gives you an idea. These are bankable projects that have very high impacts that otherwise are going to be lacking capital, and we're helping them. And we're paid a placement fee on successful capital raises on the money we help them raise. So we are a self-sustaining, or will be, organization as well, and ADB and the UN wants us that way, but they're launching us for the next couple of years because we're very mission-driven. The investor picture, we're really looking at the connection of these four circles, I guess. Emerging markets, obviously, we're only working with developing countries. Tickets range from $100,000 to $10 million, and that is the missing middle, if you will, in the capital raising picture, generally worldwide, and it's exacerbated, of course, in developing countries. And the blue economy, even if people don't know the terminology. All the industries people are familiar with, and from ones that are larger scale capital needs and more capital intensive, from the green shipping to green ports, that whole sustainability to green, as well as marine energy, to ones that are much more micro or certainly small businesses, and payments for ecosystem services like the mangroves and coral reefs that we mentioned. And so impact investing is, the other. Having a mission in addition to a financial return is important for all the investors we talk to, which are about 200 right now. And we're, building these relationships, and it's a long-term mission. We did do it in Europe. This region, this is a lot more challenging, yet that much more important, really. When you look at the ecosystems from the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean, there you have 2/3 of the world's water. So that's the picture of what we're doing. I want to ask my partner Joan Fulton to come up and share with you the rest of the picture, and then we're going to try to move on pretty quickly to the good panelists that we have.
Keep me on target if I go babbling on. So as Michael explained, we are a team. He does sort of investor side. I do the company side development. Better, I'm shorter. So I'm more company focused and developing the actual business project. And then Karen, who is our impact advisor, new team member, is a scientist. So you can see already we have 3 different perspectives. And as I've told everyone, it's about collaboration. And as I learned last night from one of our new friends, Helen, the word in this space is replicate, not scale. Okay, when we're talking about nature, we should be talking about replication. How do we replicate the model as opposed to scale the production of seaweed? We replicate the production. So that was my professorial hat being put on, because I have been teaching business for over 12 years as well. So what are the options really for SMEs in any market, really, and even worse, in an emerging market? So you have your platforms, your crowdfunding sources, but they're not really developed if you don't have. So you have microfinance facilities, but again, it requires a certain level of technical development. Private capital funds, not very developed. Impact loans don't reach that sweet spot. They'd rather go for the infrastructure, big deals, safe countries, safe legal situations. Bank loans, they lend to the clients they know. They don't have the collateral. Blockchain finance is just beginning. It's new tech. They don't know it. Corporates. I would say the corporates are playing a very big role in this area. And in fact, Lisa, who will be talking from Nestle's ESG perspective and seaweed specialist within the ESG group, will show the role that corporates play. And I think corporates are a massively untapped source of collaboration. And insurance players are long-term players. As we heard from Swiss Re yesterday, they're thinking very long-term. So how do I push this button? Is this the right one? Yes. Okay. So, so the question is, how do we actually do this? It's all nice in talk. It's all nice in concept. Like many times we say, it's big concept. What are you really doing? Okay. So we have to have resource levels. We have to understand, what have people been saying the last 2 days? We need information. We need consistency. We need to know which standards to apply which. So we're trying to be like a mini university, a mini academy, a reference point to gather a lot of information. The UN organizations are a huge, huge resource, but you have to know it's there. So we're trying to dig into it and tap into the right people and how to get the information. We're not trying to reinvent anything. We don't have the time to reinvent. There's a huge amount of resource out there. So that is one of the aspects, the knowledge center that we're working on. And it's a package deal. It's environment, it's social, it's business, but we keep our mind very clearly focused on the financial markets requirements. As we've heard again, this cannot be done without private capital, and as Philippe Hildebrand said very clearly, there's the money, but we don't know how to get it to you, okay? And they're not going to give it to you for free or just give it to you. So it's a game we have to match the two sides, but we always have our vision on what the financial markets want because we're coming from a financial market background. We know how to structure companies. We know the macro environment is very important, so we have to put all of this together. So what do? One is information, the standards, the reporting, the accounting, all of that we're very aware of and are trying to standardize this as much as possible. Second, we work with mentors. We identify projects that are out there in the field, but we don't know it all. Okay, we can go through a first cut and say, yes, you're going in the right direction. We think you qualify. Whatever you are, shipping, green port, MPA, which Blue Finance and Diana will talk more about that. We go across many, many sectors. So we have to know who the players are who are considered knowledgeable, good people. So that is the technical advice that goes to the companies themselves. Okay, I'm getting the warning sign already. Okay, and the potential for, and also financing instruments. We have to aggregate somehow because financial markets don't want individual deals, they want aggregation. So we're working on aggregation. And then we train the local companies. I don't know if you heard Rob, I don't forget his last name, from Cameron, said Nestle is made up of 600,000 farmers, and that's what we're doing. We're working with individual little organizations, and the idea is to duplicate the work that we do on the ground, but they have to do it themselves, okay? We show them the way, but then they have to want to do it. Nobody can force somebody to do something. So we are a channel to bring private capital into the blue economy space, in particular for the SMEs. We're trying to be the information source of all of these different sectors, like an hourglass, right? You have the money and you have the needers, but you have to have somebody in the middle to tie it all together. So we have the pipeline of projects that we're working with partners a lot to identify. We then do a screening, we work with experts, and then we get them ready, we coach them, and again, we're going to have to work with partners, local partner. One of our biggest local partners to date has been UNDP. I have to give them super credit for all of the doors they've opened for us at the government level, the enabling level, and they're the ADB, who will talk later about one of their initiatives, and UNEP as well. So everyone working together to make this happen. And the investors are the third part. And so we've got our vision on the end game at this point. I think that's all. We'll take a few questions, but maybe not many, because I may be over my time. But if you have any particular questions right now about our project and the initial study that was done, we'd be happy to help you answer a question. Yes? Yes.
Thank you. If you have aggregation, there's demand, and then there's the project, and then, you know, what you talk about when you talk about aggregation from an investor point of view or from a project point of view?
It is, do you want to answer that or do you want me to answer? Go ahead. We have to aggregate by sector because most, in fact, it's a matrix. You're going to have to aggregate by sector, and you're going to have to aggregate by geography, because many investors, and the sweet spot of investors for here is a very, very select group. This is not your standard impact investing by any means. So it has to be somebody who's willing to emerging markets, SMEs, and blue economy, and many people don't really understand what that means. So we have a lot of capacity building, enabling, educating to do at many levels, including local. To get back to your question, so there could be a seaweed facility, for example, that could go seaweed across countries. So you may want seaweed in Bangladesh, but not seaweed over there. So it's going to have to be quite tailored to meet investor needs. But again, one element I forgot to mention is the blended finance. We have to work with blended finance, either de-risking, catalytic capital, and that is where ADB comes in. Because ADB will work at large numbers. ADB doesn't work on little individual deals. 20 million is already kind of peanut size. So we have to work with who our partners are or other partners, any financial institutions out there. We're happy to talk to you as well. So it is that kind of thinking, but it's complex. It's very complex because we're dealing with macroeconomic enabling factors, political environments. We understand the currency issues, the legal issues. There are a whole bunch of macro issues. So we're going to have to come up with a methodology to score all those so it's easier for investors to invest. Anybody else? Question? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next series.
I don't think either of us said this, but unless you get we see this on land too, it's not a blue phenomenon only. Just want to mention that unless you get the buy-in from the communities, in this case coastal communities, you don't have a sustainable strategy. No matter how much money you throw at it, it's just not going to last. And so that's what we're doing. And the buy-in with the coastal communities means who are the companies that they know and that are hiring their brothers and sisters and nephews. It's the ones that are based there, the small and medium companies. So it's a reality that we're facing on a worldwide basis, and we're just working with the blue part of that story in Asia Pacific initially. So did you want to introduce Lisa? Yeah.
I'll explain. Right now, we have 4 players who are directly involved with the on-the-ground projects. One is Lisa Bolton, who is a manager in the ESG group of Nestle, and her specialty is seaweed. So she will come up and give a short presentation about their activity. And then we have 3 remote speakers. I will quickly introduce them now. One is Fred Puckelhabs, who is from Seagreen, which is the using technology to gather data related to seaweed farm, which they also have. The second is using application to gather data and artificial intelligence for waste management, and then to enhance the circular economy around waste. And the third is Fauzal Rizki, who is from Sampangan. I forgot that Fabriadi is from Gringo. And Fauzal is from Sampangan, a company in Indonesia. And they have a new technology that actually converts the waste into marketable products. So we're dealing with circular economy data at this point. Okay, so Lisa.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Joan and Michael, for inviting me here to speak today. I'm just firstly a quick introduction. So Lisa Bolton, I have 2 hats. I'm here with both of those hats on today. The first is for the last 2.5 years, I've been working on our greenhouse gas performance system, which is all around calculating our greenhouse gas emissions with our net zero targets in mind, and also developing an ESG portfolio system to manage all of our projects related to responsible sourcing, climate, water and packaging, which is expanding as our commitments also expand. So putting in place a way of really being able to review, approve, track, ensure we're delivering on all of our commitments. My other hat is seaweed coloured, and it's a passion that I developed when I started to look into our net zero roadmap right at the beginning and thought, well, okay, how are we going to achieve this? Looking at our biggest footprint being obviously within our scope 3, within fresh milk, cocoa, coffee, and started to look at those systems. And I just find that if you start diving into that, you can't help tripping over seaweed. So I went back into the organisation and said, what are we already doing about this? Who's already looking into this? And found pockets around the group in R&D, packaging, food, within different businesses that we're already starting to look at. And obviously we already use some parts of seaweed as thickeners and gels within our products, but how to expand that and raise that up. So for the last 2 years, I've been running a seaweed focus group to try and drive that topic forwards. And I am incredibly fortunate to be able now to turn my passion, my interest into my job. So I'm moving now over into a project that I'll mention afterwards with Pet Care Europe, who are looking at ocean regeneration as part of their regenerative agriculture. So the two are being linked together, which is wonderful. But I just wanted to start with the context of our overall ESG commitments. So our net zero target is obviously a big one, very important. But it doesn't stand alone. So with all of the work that we're doing on deforestation, on living wage, on responsible sourcing, ocean and water health, improving our operational efficiency, we've been working on that for a number of years. So we're actually, that's probably going to be the first box that's easy to tick. The difficult part, and as you said, Joan, we've hundreds of thousands of suppliers. So the challenge is really within our supply chain and how we collaborate, how we work together to bring everyone along on this journey. And it's not the situation where we want to go in and as Nestlé and say, you must do this. You know, this is how the change must happen. It has to be through being able to prove the benefits, work on the ground, and drive that change really on the field level for the farmers and the suppliers to understand the benefits overall for them as well. So it's not something that we just want to do so we can tick a box and say, yes, we achieved a 20% or a 50% reduction. It has to be for the benefit of the communities that are involved as well. So I will try. Yes, wonderful. But in order to drive change, first we had to understand and measure our baseline, understand where we were, both in terms of net zero, our other commitments as well, in terms of packaging, water, the impact on responsible sourcing. But the area that I've been most focused on has been our greenhouse gas emissions. So developing a system that will allow us to really report on a regular basis on our progress based on real-time data from all our activity datas, merged with emissions factors to be able to give a quarterly view of how we're progressing. It's a challenge, and it's going to take a long time to get right because quite often we're using averages, industry emissions factors. So what we're working towards is working with our suppliers to be able to use primary data to really shift as much as possible towards the supplier's own emissions factors. And then importantly, to embed that within decision-making across the organisation. So whether we're talking about procurement or logistics, manufacturing, recipe, renovation, all areas of the business need to have visibility to drive those decisions as they go through their daily activities. But also importantly is building capabilities both internally and engaging with our stakeholders as well. So producing guidelines, coaching, whether it's our internal teams or external partners, to be able to help them to work together on this whole journey. And so now I've come to my favourite topic now. So Nestlé Pet Care Purina Europe just announced their 2022 updated commitments, and as part of that was in line with the group's strategy around regenerative agriculture, but also this realisation that the land and the ocean are not two separate systems, that what we do on land is impacting the oceans, that we're reliant on the oceans for ecosystem services, and that those are struggling. And so whatever initiatives that we start to look at, we should bear that in mind at both sides of this coin. We did an initiative to look based on the planetary boundary framework and the SDGs to really understand, not just from our net zero perspective, but in terms of all the planetary boundaries, where we needed to focus. And so regenerative agriculture is obviously at the heart of what we do. So we're looking now at how we can work with ocean restoration projects, regeneration projects, how we can potentially use seaweed solutions to bring back onto land to reduce the impact, to turn off the tap in a way of what's ending up in the ocean in the first place. We're looking at multiple indicators as well, so not just the climate, obviously greenhouse gas emissions are critical, but also being able to track and measure biodiversity, the excess nitrogen runoff, water quality. All of these different indicators are becoming more and more important, and we need the ways of being able to track, measure and report on them. But what's absolutely key in this area is that we can't wait for all of the tools and the methods and everything to be perfect before we get going. So, for example, all of the methodology around measuring exactly how much carbon from a particular seaweed farm, that's still evolving. The research is going on and there's some great steps ahead. But we have enough to know that it's worth investing, it's worth going ahead and making a start in this area. So it's important to avoid this analysis paralysis and really get going already. So I'm very excited now to be working on this project going forwards. My background from the greenhouse gas emissions and the ESG portfolio side is incredibly useful on this, I've found. So going forwards, we're looking at many different areas of ocean restoration, but seaweed obviously has the potential to reduce the impact on the land at the same time. And I just leave you with this, one of my favourite quotes from Paul Hawken, who was with us last week. So thank you. I think I kept to my 5 minutes. I kept to my 5 minutes.
Well, you're better than I was. We now will turn over to, is that okay? We will now turn over to three remote speakers. And the first one is Fred Puckle-Hubbs from the COO of Seagreen, the company monitoring the data of the farms. I hope Fred is on the line, Karen. This is like a new experience for me, I can tell you. Oh, no. Yeah, Seagreen and Murray. And Fred, the floor is yours, wherever you are.
Sorry, okay. Hello. Great, I heard that. Thank you, Michael. Hi, everybody. It's really, really good to be with you. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. So I've got 5 minutes to talk to you about Seagreen and a little bit about our partners, Murray Oceans. So we've been working, as Joan has said, on these projects for quite some time. It's a long story and a long road. And I think from what Lisa has just very kindly talked about with regards to the potential of seaweed in the space, it's really, really a really important area, and one I think that more people should be getting to know about. And frankly, fortunately, rather, we've had considerable press interest in seaweed in the last few years. But what hasn't always been completely obvious is the sheer quantity or sheer number of seaweed farmers that already exist in Asia. Most of the time, coverage relates to new seaweed ventures in Europe and the US, and most of the investment is unfortunately going to those particular initiatives. But within Indonesia, there are already 267,000 seaweed farming families. And it's those seaweed farming families that both Seagreen and our partners in Indonesia, Murray, have been focusing on providing services for and ultimately governance models to support in the last 2 years. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides with everybody. I hope you can see those. So for us, this is one component of the story, and I will take you through the Murray journey as well in a second. But the real critical piece is we've heard across both what Lisa was saying in terms of monitoring, but also in terms of investment oversight and connectivity of different actors in the value chain is the data question. How do we take something that is a fundamentally non-digital value chain and turn it into a digitalized proposition that is also circular? So what we did was we, as an organization with a financial services background, initially wanting to find a method of distribution for financial services, in particular climate change related insurance products to help coastal communities at the forefront of climate change mitigate some of the issues they see from that kind of threat. We looked at a system that would allow us to integrate both traceability and financial services up front, because access to market and access to finance was one of the key areas in which we knew farmers were mostly interested and had the vast majority of their needs. So what we did was, instead of thinking of traceability as the basis of just simply what information was provided to downstream buyers, we made the determination that it had to be useful to the farmers. And as a result, we thought of it as what we call a state model, which allows us to iteratively add information, attribute that to different stages of production. So bit by bit, we build up the data profile, and within that, we integrate commercial infrastructure in the form of payments, so allowing farmers to make the trades directly on the ground using their mobile phones. The final component to make sure this was actually useful to the farmers was environmental data. So bringing all those things together, we actually began to create connectivity for the farmers directly with the buyers at the downstream end of the chain. So in terms of the way that we're building the platform, the front end is a mobile app that's free to download. And the other side is a range of data tools designed to help buyers and other interested parties, both on and off the value chain, to visualize and analyze the way that seaweed is grown and the way that it impacts the livelihoods of farmers on the ground, as well as the environments in which they grow their seaweed. So how we do that is to provide a range of application services. As I mentioned, traceability is kind of the base plate, but the important thing here is that the farmers gain immediate value from the environmental data. You can see there in the top right corner, the sensor that we've had in the water across, just off the coast of Bonnet, South Sulawesi for the last year. That's collecting data which can be returned to the farmers and gives them better insight into some of the growing conditions that they have there. A good example is that salinity is a key vector for seaweed growth. Low salinity when it rains is not good, but unfortunately the farmers didn't have any data to back that up. So what that means with this kind of data is that we're able to, in a circular fashion, take data out of the value chain, and using the bespoke platform and blockchain technology that Michael's mentioned, is we're able to use that data, cut it in different ways and share it amongst different partners, research institutions, development agencies, financial institutions, and channel insights and new processes and practices and financial services products back into the value chain to the benefit of the farmers. Of course, as I mentioned, the key thing is that the app is free to download for the farmers, but we can charge for those data subscription services downstream to the buyers who wish to look at that data. So I know Lisa there mentioned that the value in terms of the emissions profiling is extremely important. That's the kind of data that we can make available to downstream buyers. But simultaneously, the credit ratings and the business performance data that relate to the financial services profile of a farmer is also very interesting to the rural banks and development banks. So it allows us not only to provide them with products, but also to monitor the impact on a socioeconomic level. For Seagreen, we are still in our capital raise, as Michael has mentioned, but we're targeting an adoption of 20,000 plus farmers in the next 5 years. And the nice thing is that our platform is reusable, and I think I can say, Joan, replicable across multiple different contexts. We should be able to use this platform for any other type of aquaculture farming support. What we do need for this kind of technology, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly as I'm conscious of time, is a front-end growing organization. We've heard time and again, these technology platforms can sometimes simply be dropped in a plug-and-play fashion for farmers to use, but that often doesn't solve the issues. Some of the research that we saw was related to the digital proposition I've just mentioned. Some of the research we carried out, I apologize, was related to that digital proposition. But the vast majority of the improvements required were in the form of governance, process, and practice. And as a result, in Indonesia, we decided to take the vast knowledge base of the farmers that we knew was there and turn that into a well-governed, narrowly aggregated, so simply just one level of aggregation, community-based seaweed farming company in the form of Marry Oceans. So in Bonnet, there are approximately 1,000 seaweed farmers already in our database. And at the moment, we're just taking the first 50 with some very generous initial funding from a couple of sources, which will be announced in the next couple of days, up to our first 50 farmers who will inhabit this circular business model for Marry. The interventions at each stage of the value chain allow us to control the growing environments using quality seed stock in controlled growing environments that have environmental sensors linked to data tools, including Seagreen, promoting the transparency and quality required to access new markets and finance, which are subsequently reinvested back into the business model. The other core component here is that we've created a bespoke cooperative structure. So the commercial organization focuses on the quality production of seaweed, whilst the cooperative focuses on the services, both financial and otherwise, that support the community of farmers that grow the seaweed. And in that way, we keep the circularity going on a financial level, But also, as I mentioned earlier, we're continuously improving the cycle, both in the form of the insights produced from Seagreen, but also through training programs at the cooperative. Both Seagreen and Mari were built on the principles of the UN SDGs. As Michael and Joan have alluded to, the UN is an extremely powerful organization, and it's great to be able to access these kind of targets. But we found that getting right into the depths of the different goals and their sub-targets has been extremely beneficial for us. So we've been looking at how we can meet primarily these 4 goals, but we do touch on 13 of the 17 across both Seagreen and Mari. So we see ourselves as an impact business first, but both propositions are sustainable business oriented and designed to make a profit that can be reinvested back into the seaweed industry and to the coastal communities that it supports. I think that's everything from me. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Fred. I think we all learn with every sentence that you speak. So we will come back to some Q&A after the third presentation. So now we will have Febriadi Pratama from the organization called Gringo, which is another technology application oriented towards waste management in Indonesia. Febriadi, welcome. And I don't know who's controlling the slides at this point, but if it's you, please go ahead.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. So can everybody hear me? Yes. And yes, answering the questions, I will be presenting myself. So let me share my screens. I hope everyone can see. Okay, thank you. I can hear that. So hi, everybody. I guess good afternoon there. It's good evening here. So my name is Febriadi, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gringo. So basically, we are a tech company that focus on leveraging digital technology to bring solution for community and environment. So we work together closely with different communities. We help them tackle different issues of sustainability using digital technologies and a small part of hardware. So we started in 2015 with this problem, the issue of waste management that have become so bad by that time. And we made a bad reputation everywhere around the globe. So basically everyone knows the numbers already. And basically back then in 2015, there was this one journal articles that says Indonesia was the second largest polluters for plastic. We started off then. So we went out to the field and found out that there was one of the issue that very apparent. So there was not enough reliable data on waste. We saw a lot of poor data source, lack of transparency, and unreliable data analysis on the ground. So that's when we came up with a solution to develop one integrated platform. The goal was to create better data collection methods, have a system to monitor and track what's going on, also using AI to help with analysis and predictions. So we do a lot of activities for our partners and customers. We help them immersively to the world of sustainability, as well as connect with networks of our communities through our programs. So we developed 3 different products that serve different purposes for data collection activities, operational monitoring and as well as education for the communities, helping our users to identify different type of waste using AI. It's a fun way to learn, basically. So at this moment, we have reached more than 200 locations across the countries. We have 4 project locations, and at the moment, our AI model can identify more than 11 categories of different recyclables. And if you think that's a lot, there's a lot more to come, actually, because in recyclables, there's so many type of recyclables that a lot of people don't actually understand or know about it. And throughout times, we have tracked many impacts on the communities we tap into, and we hopefully to increase the impact better. We see a lot of increase in livelihoods. We see a lot of increase in recyclables being recycled, as well as how people can actually get benefit through our system. This is basically our roadmaps as well as our milestones. We have worked with different projects from different organizations. We got a project before from USAID, US State Department, Google, Coca-Cola, and other companies as well. In 2022, we further developed our product as well as expand on GHG emission reduction calculation. So we're not just tackling the issue of waste, but also we are trying to see it from a larger point of view. And we understand as well that SDGs are pretty well connected within each other. And so we have many companies and expert partners to help us in our development, such as Google and many others. We have also partners that have expertise in GHG calculations as well. They have been working in the country as well as outside the country. And I guess that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Febriadi. We will keep your questions till the end of this next speaker, and then we will deal with the product-focused questions, and then we'll move on to other presentations. Now we will have Muhammad Faisal Rizki from Sampangan, also based in Indonesia. Remember, they're 7 hours ahead of us, so it's quite late, so thank you for staying up. I know people in Indonesia get up extremely early in the morning, so it's a very, very late day. And he will talk about his product and his impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Fauzal, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Sampangan Indonesia. Give me 1 second to put up my slides. Today I'm going to share our story about how we're doing marine debris circular economy using the technology that we call the magic box to revitalize waste and save our planet. So when I say greetings from Bali, I'm actually now in Bali. And I think this is a place that needs no introduction. It's a beautiful paradise on earth. But what people doesn't see is what happens behind that. So every year, like hundreds of tons of waste ends up at the marine beaches across the island, and like a lot of plastics also leak to the environment. And the fact is, Indonesia produces 70 million tons of waste annually, in which 70% of those are leaked to the environment. So the main root cause is simply because the lack of infrastructure, because there's no sustainable business model that supports this infrastructure, as well as lack of collaborative ecosystem to actually manage this waste. Everybody's working in the silos. And these are the 3 main problems that we're trying to solve with Sampangan. And we're starting with a technology that we called the Magic Box. So the Magic Box is a proprietary technology that was invented by our chief scientist, Dr. Shani, that are able to convert all types of waste into high-value material using a process called carbonization or heat radiation. So it's very different than maybe what we know, such as incineration or burning. So we're using heat to convert all of this waste into products. Think of it as our rice cooker or oven at home. So it's a patented technology that we manufacture and operate here in Indonesia. One of these machines can process up to 10 tons per day. It might sound small, but we can design this in a modular way, having us flexibility to process all types of waste volume, from small into big in terms of hundreds or even 1,000 tons of waste per day. So the most important thing is that it's zero waste, which means every waste that comes in are all converted into products. And we can make sure that we are also capturing the carbon from this process. So the technology is proven. We have been certified through technology audits with the Ministry of Environment in Indonesia, as well as ISO labs throughout the country. On top of the Magic Box, we also have other technology and systems where the whole purpose is to make sure we're able to capture value and make sure that we can extend the life cycle. And this is how it works. So we take in waste from multiple sources: municipality, commercial, industry, agriculture, state, where either they send their waste to us or we create our zero waste and circular hub at their site, in which we produce multiple outputs such as activated carbon, liquid smoke, biofertilizer, recycled materials, and more, in which we use all of these products in the downstream circular economy implementation, such as increasing productivity in agriculture using regenerative agriculture based on carbon, water treatment, biodisinfectant, sustainable construction materials, and many more. And waste management as well, circular economy is a huge, huge market. It's multi-billion market in Asia and $2 trillion globally. But on top of that, we're also serving a 4.5 trillion US dollar circular economy market globally. And our business model primarily are product sales, where we sell the products that we generated from our operation to downstream industries. And we also have waste processing service, as well as carbon credit that we're working with a partner in Geneva. So our technology and our work are recognized globally. We've had multiple gold medals in technology innovations across Malaysia, Japan, Korea, US, UK, and Germany, as well as recognitions in Geneva. So we're part of the Accelerate 2030 cohort and some other Asia Pacific stage. These are our tractions so far. So we've been around in Asia since 2015, and we've deployed 18 of this technology across Indonesia in 7 provinces. And this year, we're proud to announce that we are now processing waste in Bali to process the marine debris that comes from the island to make sure that we can do that in a circular way. And by the end of Q4 this year or next year, we'll be doing our first internalization in Brazil, in partnership with Solobio that we met through Accelerate 2030 program by Impact Hub. These are several SDGs that we're measuring from our operations, SDG number 1, 11, 13, 5, and 12. So far, we've processed over 250,000 tons of waste since our inception. And we are raising fund. We are raising $1 million US in SAFE, where 300K of that is already subscribed. So we want to use this to develop proof at scale to unlock several business model and use cases and review pipelines, as well as building the team for a bigger team. So the one backing us this far are advisors, angel investors coming from one of the best tech companies in Indonesia, from GoTo, Gojek, Investry, as well as Impact Hub ecosystem. So yeah, our vision is to create a zero waste world where everything we make this planet converted back to the value, use unlocking technology infrastructure, innovative business model, and circular ecosystem. Help us to process 1 million tons of waste per year, right? And hopefully we can collaborate together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fauzal. We obviously are running late, but I would like to propose that whoever would like to make one question to each project, speak up quickly, and we will then move on to the next presentations, because we have 3. This is like really tight, but it's really hard given the breadth of everything we do to choose what to show you. And so it's all about connecting the dots, spreading the information, sharing knowledge, and what can be done in one country can be done in another, maybe across a different sector. So if you have, let's start with Lisa. If somebody has a question for Lisa, we'll permit 1 question per entity. Please speak up. There is a microphone floating around for a question. Does anyone have a question for Lisa? Helen.
Hi, yeah, I'll speak loudly. Sorry, I'm a loud voice. Thank you so much. What a fascinating array of interventions and products. I think we should all have a magic box in our backyard. But on the seaweed, really interested in understanding a little bit more about, maybe this is for Fred as well, the supply chain, and what are you doing with the seaweed? And can you, with those measurements, given it's such a great sequester, carbon remover, can you measure that? Oh yeah, is it working now? Yeah. So with the seaweed, what are you doing with it? How does the supply chain work? And can you get the data on the carbon removals that you can use then in your supply chain? Thanks.
So where we're currently using seaweed, for example, carrageenan within some of our products, there's very limited data on that at all. So we're using industry averages. So solutions like Fred's, where they'll be able to collect that all the way through, is an absolute godsend. And if we could have that replicated across all of our different ingredients as well, then we would just be be overjoyed. So to be able to already go into an industry to have that bottom-up data available and that traceability and everything with it would just be perfect. So when we're looking at all the different potential applications for seaweed, there's a number of different areas. Obviously, as a food ingredient, rather than just as a gel or a thickener. So is there a potential for expanding it, really making it a hero ingredient within our products? Or even using it to extract protein or fibres within the food area. Then potentially livestock feed, bioplastics, biostimulants and biofertilizers. There's also potential, and there's some fantastic projects going on as seaweed as a feedstock into fermented protein, which I'm very excited about. So I think that there isn't a business within Nestle that couldn't benefit, even Nestle Waters looking at bioplastics, let's say. But all of these are at a very early stage at the moment. What's very clear is that we prefer certainly to go along the road of cultivated and in a replicated way. So rather than relying on wild harvests, which are already at their limits. So looking at sustainable ways to cultivate at scale. And along with that, to have the data to allow us to calculate the footprint. So the real end-to-end footprint from cultivating all the way through to the final application. And obviously that will vary depending on how it's produced, what species, the location. But certainly also looking at how we can support that, how we can maybe co-create either with the seaweed farmers or the producers all the way through to the end. But it is early stages, and I can't give details or anything, but yes, the aim is to really work closely with both farmers and producers throughout the supply chain, and to try and keep those supply chains as short as possible as well.
Answer one question, which is half a question for Fred as well, because I know recently you've signed a rather large supply chain contract, I believe, and they're, well, with Muddy, but no names, of course. But the point is, what was their perspective for the supply chain and the value of your information in that? I've asked the question, sorry, but it was an obvious lead on from Lisa's answer, excuse me.
It's a very good question, Joan. I think the value for those guys, and thank you, Lisa, for your very kind description. You've almost put the words in my mouth. Is partly the commercial value of the data, of course, which everyone would expect in terms of the product quality, but it's really that impact data. It's the social, the environmental, and the I guess the natural capital data that we really want to capture. So obviously for some people that can be really obvious and they can say, well, it's just the carbon, which I think is very limited. And it's quite a one-dimensional view of how seaweed can benefit the planet. We see the value of multiple different commodities as something that should be segregatable, as you could call it, that you can divide into multiple different areas. So it's part of the reason that we've used blockchain, because we want to be able to look at how, instead of creating, crypto tokens or whatever it might be, we actually want to look at being able to tokenize the real non-financial value of an asset alongside the commercial value. So quite apart from being a useful tool architecturally that makes things simple and ultimately quite cheap, the ability for us to look at a value chain and say, yes, a batch of seaweed is worth $1,500 a ton, but it's also worth X amount in terms of biodiversity, or Y amount in terms of nutrient reallocation, or Z amount in terms of the social equity for the farmers that have actually produced it. If we're collecting enough data through our tools, that's perfectly achievable. And it's very elegant and simple to turn that into a token that can then be commercialized. I hesitate to use that word because it's really not the right way to look at it. Really what we think of it as is incentivized. So encouraging people to act in a certain way further upstream in the value chain in return for real reward, not something that's pushed upstream, but something that is effectively channeled downstream. So empowering the seaweed farmers as ocean custodians is really the objective there. We want to give them the tools to be able to show what they're doing from a natural capital and from an environment perspective, and then provide them with the appropriate remuneration for doing that service. So it's a complex issue. And I think, of course, there will always need to be a financial element to it, which is, sadly, unfortunately, the way the world works. But we also need to be able to bring in those non-financial values of these products. And likewise, by producing a system that is replicable and scalable across contexts, we can use the same architecture again and again and again, and we can start to do really interesting stuff like how we tie together two value chains. So as Lisa's pointed out, one of the current uses of seaweed is for carrageenan as a thickener, but the biofertilizer piece, the biostimulants onto the fields, if we can trace the environmental value of the seaweed from seedling through the value chain to a product that is then applied to a second value chain, we can start to look at how assimilation or removal or transformation or replacement of carbon can be achieved, for example, in these different value chains from end to end. And that becomes a really powerful story, not only for the business as a whole and for the downstream purchasers of these products and the consumers, but also for the farmers themselves. So I think that's the power of that data.
Excellent, thank you. We have two more players who are allowed one question each. Who would like to ask a question? Yes?
This is a question for Farzal,
Sampangan, he's getting the microphone right now. I would also like to say there are 2 points in that the value stays at the producer level, which is super important, and also cooperation.
Hello? Farzal, do you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm presently dealing in seaweed. Just your magic box is just fantastic. Thank you very much for showing this. Just one question, a quick question. Can you use this magic box also for creating biochar, biofertilizers? I mean, burning directly seaweed and producing then biochar and biofertilizers? Did you try this?
Actually, yes. In fact, early this year, we decided to dedicate a portion of our operation, an operation that we call the carbon factory, where the primary focus is to process biomass waste from agriculture or any kind of like wood biomass industries and convert this into activated carbon, not just biochar, but activated carbon using technology. So the reason why we're able to do this is because, we are able, through the technology, we're able to convert all this biomass waste, including seaweed, into activated carbon as well as liquid biofertilizer for agriculture.
Yeah, thank you. Very clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fazal. And who would like to now focus on the tech side of the waste management? I will just make one point that the definition of marine in the United Nations at the UNOC conference in Lisbon is 100 kilometers from the coastline inland. Okay, anything that touches that space is considered marine. That is why waste management on land is such a critical element for the whole marine coastal resilience, MPA, and everything else space. Question for Fabriadi. Who has? I have a question. Fabriadi, how can you see your activity working with Fred's activity? Your technology from the waste management sphere, how could you see that helping Fred? Getting you getting us out of silos.
I guess when if you're talking about the marine, we can track down like how much waste is actually being generated, and then also making sure that everything is being generated on land inland doesn't actually affect anything on the ocean or the how do you say that the coastal marine activities. And I guess I'm not really sure like how that connected, but like when Fred is talking about blockchain, that is something that definitely can be tapped into the waste as well, because once you take the data and then you put it into the blockchain, you would understand as well what's going on the ground, and you know which part of this area that needs to be improved for the waste management. I don't know if that answered the questions. I hope that answered the questions.
No, excuse me, but being a business professor, my questions are always to challenge everyone's thinking.
No
So
worries.
getting you out of the box. But I leave you all with that same thought as how can you all help each other, because you're all physically near each other. So it's a conversation to be continued. Okay, we're moving on to part 3. Thank you all for your contributions to this second part, which is focused on projects. Now we're moving slightly more often to this finance sphere. Michael, would you like to introduce the speakers, or would you like me to do? Go ahead. Okay, we're a bit short of time, so I want to be sure to give each speaker time. We have Diana Denke from COIS, who's an impact financial advisory firm, several locations around the world, who will be talking about the Blue Finance projects, MPA management, public-private partnerships that they have been doing. And then we will have Alexis Lebel, who is actually in Manila, also connected online remotely. And then Pierre Bardou-Chesneau will be speaking about Global Fund for Coral Reefs, because he wears 2 hats, one as the UN head of UN Capital Development Fund, head for the nature-based activity, and also head of Global Fund for Coral Reefs. So those are the 3 players. I'll retire. Michael takes over now. But first is Diana.
Thank you, Joan. Nice to be here, everyone. So I'm a principal at COIS and a climate and nature platform lead. COIS is an innovative finance advisory where we help projects with a demonstrable social or environmental impact to design and structure innovative finance vehicles. And here we are collaborating with Blue Finance, who is another social enterprise, on this specific project. So I'll be happy to take you through what they are doing. Oops. So Blue Finance is a social enterprise whose aim is to fight marine biodiversity loss and improve local livelihoods. I'm going to talk about we here, but it's always Blue Finance's work, just for the sake of simplicity. So we manage a federation of 10 bankable marine protected areas that altogether preserve 1 million and 200,000 hectares of high biodiverse coral reefs and improve the livelihoods of about 20,000 local fishermen. We believe that there are market opportunities that exist for the marine protected areas and that they can generate revenues for their own management. And thus, so that they can ensure this financial sustainability, we implement nature-positive businesses in and around these parks. And our track record to date really proves this, because since the deployment of Blue Finance's first investment in Belize in 2021, approximately already a quarter of their operational budget have been covered by the revenues that are coming in from the ecotourism program. So that means that in a pretty short time, just until 2025, they will become independent from donor funding. So you can see the overall impact in numbers. We're talking about an aggregation of 10 marine protected areas, about 100 million tons of avoided CO2 emissions in the form of Verra certified blue carbon credit, about over 1 million hectares of coral reef that is protected, 150 enterprises created, 20,000 coastal communities that are supported. And we have about 200 MPA staff on the ground employed, and over 300,000 hectares of mangroves that are going to be protected. Currently, this MPA blended finance facility is a $22 million facility that invests in a federation of bankable MPAs. And for its first phase, we seek to invest in 10 MPAs in 3 regional clusters in the global south. So that is the Caribbean, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The facility will consist of a mix of performance grants, refundable grants, and debt financing on a 50-50 basis. The investments are going to be mainly directed towards CapEx in the form of setting up revenue-generating activities in the marine protected areas, such as ecotourism facilities, blue carbon projects, and artisanal aquaculture, such as mud crab fisheries, and equipment as well to patrol these marine protected areas, and in some cases, some early stage OPEX. So given that these are mostly like impact-linked loans, there are some relief given on interest rates based on the achievement of certain social and environmental outcomes. To date, about 45% of the total facility is already committed from 4 large international banks and 3 major donors. And the minimum participation that we seek is $250,000 with the option to select MPA geographies. I want to mention there's also opportunity to invest in the individual projects, but those who invest in the blended facility will become senior investors to those who just invest on a specific project. So our ask is $5 million USD in refundable grant or debt financing and $7 million in grants that we're still fundraising for. In the spirit of collaboration, it's important to mention that Blue Finance relies on the work of a multidisciplinary team. We have about 50 rangers, community officers, and managers on the ground that is supported by a small team of senior international management team of 8 that supports them with strategic decision-making and the financing. And Blue Finance is really one of the only teams with actual experience in co-managed self-financed MPAs. Nicolas Pascal, who is the founder of Blue Finance, is a marine scientist and an ex-investment banker. So already an example of multidisciplinarity in himself. And our team brings a cumulative experience of all these number of years across various areas that you can see that for any nature-based solution project to succeed, you need to have the elements of these different multidisciplinary teams collaborating. Thank you very much. If interested, please do reach out to me or Nicolas. It was a pleasure to introduce the project to you.
Thank you. And here we have Alexis. Is it Alexi or Alexis? You never answered my question.
In French, you would call me Alexi, but usually just people call me Alex.
Fine. No. Okay, just wanted to be sure.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for giving us a chance to present today. So I'm Alex from the ADB in Manila. As Michael was saying initially, so yes, the ADB is extremely committed to Blue Finance. And for this purpose, we have in Jakarta what we call our ADB Blue Southeast Asia Finance Hub, which is trying to accelerate the development of a pipeline of blue projects in Southeast Asia, and also together with the project try to catalyze a flow of public and private money to enhance those projects. So the thematics we are looking at, ecosystem management and restoration, sustainable fisheries, for instance, pollution reduction, coastal resilience. We have actually published an ADB Ocean Finance Framework about the priorities we are focusing on. But what I want to develop a bit today is our Blue Finance Accelerator, which is an initiative of this Blue Hub. And the idea of the Blue Finance Accelerator is to try to identify ocean health and blue economy-related projects, and also, but at the same time, to enhance the capacity of local governments and SOEs on blue finance. Ultimately, we are also trying to support SMEs which have relevant technology and services for preserving the ocean health. So how does it work in practice? So ultimately, we want to actually generate a pipeline of projects for ADB to potentially finance. And how we do it, we in fact have a dual track approach. So we are working with UNDP, UNDP Indonesia, and they are actually running the accelerator part. So UNDP is trying to accelerate a few, basically 12 startups and SMEs involved in the blue economy. But at the same time, and that's where it's interesting, we have a government track, which is managed by ADB, under which we train government officials on topics that are interesting for them. But of course, the tracks are connected. So the idea that there is dialogue, there is matchmaking, there is communication during the whole process, so that ultimately we are trying to have those startups and SMEs work together with the government on projects, sovereign projects that may be financed by the ADB. So that's the purpose of the program. At the end, there would be a demo day. And of course, we hope that when government officials see the demo day, they will also pick a few interesting projects, a few interesting startups. And of course, we won't start and at the end of the demo day, we are going to continue afterwards by, trying to of course, make those startups and SMEs more investable, but also keeping those linkages with the government. The thematics we have defined, they've been discussed with the government of Indonesia, especially the coordinating ministry for maritime affairs and investments. So we're looking at sustainable fisheries, marine and coastal protections, waste management, ecotourism, marine renewable energy, and also the decarbonization of the maritime industries. Where we are in terms of timeline, so we are actually right now starting the process of startup selection. We'll do that during the month of October, and during November and December will be the acceleration and government training phase. And it will continue onwards in 2023. We'll follow up with the government. We'll try to continue the matchmaking. And again, ultimately, what we want also for ADB is a pipeline of strong, bankable ocean-related projects. Thank you very much. And of course, you are most welcome to contact us. Here are my contact details.
Thank you very much, Alexis. And in the sake of time, I really recommend that we're very happy to share everyone's contact details, but to reach out to people individually, be very happy. Now, last but not least, Pierre Bardot-Chesneau, correct pronunciation, okay. Global Fund for Coral Reefs and his perspective on how he sees their role in the blue economy. Okay, or whatever you'd like to talk about.
Thank you. I guess I have 1 minute, 2 minutes? No? I have a bit more time. Okay. I'm super jet lagged, so I'm really sorry I haven't slept. I just arrived this morning, so I'm still gonna try. I'm gonna try to be short, so I can concentrate on some key elements of the design of the Global Fund for Coral Reef. So I'm not going to describe with you the financing instruments in details, but the Global Fund for Coral Reef is the first UN fund on SDG 14. It was designed 2 years ago as a blended finance mechanism. It's innovative because it brings the UN, the private sector, private philanthropy, member states, into a platform with different funding windows, innovative funding windows. A grant fund, an equity fund, a grant fund that is able also to deploy concessional loans or guarantee, and a global instrument that cover multiple countries. I will just very quickly illustrate to you the connection between what was described and how we try to bring those solutions to coral reefs and have a biodiversity impact. Basically, our approach is to identify the most resilient reef using the science and the 50 reef stories, so trying to identify the reef that can survive climate change, and then deploy an ecosystem-based approach. Analyze in those ecosystems what are the local drivers. So if those reefs are able to survive climate change, they might not survive local drivers and human pressure on them. So we use what we call convening agents, so basically organizations that have knowledge on those reefs, of those local reefs, to analyze what are the local drivers of degradation. And then we match those local drivers of degradation with reef-positive solutions. Those reef-positive solutions are the same that you just described here. They just apply to a specific ecosystem to remove the driver of degradation. So they can be waste management, sustainable fishery, sustainable hospitalities, or ecotourism, Blue Finance is one of our convening agents in the Philippines. Yeah, and then once we have identified those solutions, we try to not scale them, but aggregate them so that we can build an investment case that can attract larger type of financing from our equity fund, which the ticket size is usually between 20 to 40 million. For example, if we look at plastic, at recycling of plastic, one of the investment case we are looking at right now is to invest in several recycling plants in multiple countries through the equity fund, so that we can invest at scale and then deploy it in multiple ecosystems that we have identified. And then to guarantee community engagement, we use the grant and deploy our grants to the communities that are going to participate in those larger business models that are part of the supply chain. I give you the example of the plastic recycling. That can mean, for example, in the Maldives, to provide a concessional loan at 0% to local collectors, local communities, so they can equip themselves and remove the plastic from those reefs that we have identified. The collectors are then paid by the company in which the equity fund has invested in, and then they can pay back their loan to the grant fund, and then we can deploy to another ecosystem. So just trying to, and then the last piece is monitoring the impact, and we are using, again, our local partners to actually monitor the impact that we will have on those reefs, identify if we have really removed the driver, and then identify any additional driver that will still harm those reefs. So it's the Global Fund for Coral Reef is trying to deploy integrated solutions and move what you have learned and what you're testing in the blue economy space into conservation. And so far, we have a larger coalition of partners from the UK, Germany, France, the US, the Canada, but also Bloomberg, Paul Allen Family Foundation, so private philanthropy. And what we are trying to do now, we've received de-risking from the Green Climate Fund into the equity fund, and we are trying to mobilize private investment into the equity fund, which is a challenge. We are starting now the process. We have fundraised 200 million over the past 2 years, and the objective is to get to 600 million. Thank you.
And I believe Global Fund for Coral Reefs has a session tomorrow, or is it? Or I forget tomorrow or when, the next day. But anyhow, this is a conversation that has to continue for sure. And Klaus Michael, this is actually a different version of aggregation. A very interesting example of aggregating an economic group to then be attractive from a financial point of view, including the catalytic grant financing. So it's very interesting. Michael, I'm going to let you wrap up. But before we do that, I have an announcement. We have a 30-minute coffee break, so we have to have turnaround. And you can check the BBB Connect app for the next sessions, which you probably already know. It's available on Google Play or the Apple Store to see all the different sessions. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Alexi and Fred and Fawzul and who am I missing? Febriadi, excuse me.
Yeah, thank you, one's here and one's remotely, for participating in this panel. It was so interesting. And it strikes me that we've covered a lot of very undervalued assets, right? The ultimate one, of course, is waste, the ultimate undervalued asset. But look at seaweed. It's this magical commodity with more uses than you can count on one hand. And it's fragmented and very high growth. And that's true on so many of the sectors of the blue economy. And the ocean, covering 70% of the Earth's surface, as we know, has been somewhat neglected. But it's exciting to see major initiatives like the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, like corporate players like Nestle, where this is clearly in the mission of these big organizations and companies, and with very high impacts from the smaller companies that we're helping on the ground and in the coastlines of the countries across the Asia-Pacific region. So stay in touch with us. Our website is oceanassets.org, where you will eventually see all the projects presented here. And we're grateful for your participation and ongoing support. Thanks so much.